From a perspective of nationality, it's important to understand that the U.S. Asian population has many different countries of origin. Key issues for Asians in our country: the historic discrimination, the diversity of groups, as well as the different reasons for financial success and their engagement in the political process. Discrimination has occurred since the first Chinese immigrants arrived to build the railroads in the 1850s and during World War II when Japanese were forced into internment camps, and after the wave of immigration of Vietnamese after the end of the Vietnam War. However, Asians as a larger group have been financially successful in our country. Some researchers believe this is due to the strong family structure, a focus on the importance of education, and their ability to assimilate. Of all ethnic groups, Asian children are less likely to be raised in a one-parent household. Also, about 50% of all Asian young adults will finish college, as compared to about 1/3 of all whites and a much lower percentage of other minority groups. Asians are also more likely to intermarry as well, as compared to other groups. This chart helps you understand the national diversity of the U.S. Asian population. These different groups have experienced periodic waves of immigration into our country. For example, at the end of the Vietnam War, a large number of Vietnamese fled their home country because of the invasion of North Vietnam by South Vietnam. In the 1800s, Chinese were lured to America by the ability to obtain work building the railroads. We tend to lump Native Americans into one group, but the reality is that this is a very diverse group of individuals. When the Europeans arrived in North America, they experienced a very diverse group of peoples, with many different customs and languages. For example, there were over 700 different languages that were spoken by the different tribes of peoples in North America. Native Americans are an example of population transfer, both voluntary and involuntary. Most of us think about the involuntary transfer, such as the Trail of Tears in 1838 and 1839. But even before, there were voluntary transfers of the Native American population due to their lands becoming uninhabitable for their lifestyle and customs due to the colonization of the Americas by the Europeans. The treatment of the Native Americans by the white Europeans that colonized North America ranged from treaties, in other words, voluntary transfers in consideration for either goods or lands, but also involuntary transfers, such as the Trail of Tears, and even genocide. To some degree, this minority is invisible because half live in rural areas and 1/3 of them live in only 3 states: Oklahoma, California, and Arizona. Thus, most Americans are not very aware of Native Americans' presence in the country until some newsworthy event occurs and gets media coverage. The rate of suicide is the highest of all racial and ethnic populations, and their life expectancy is lower than the national average. Educational attainment lags behind others as well. But self-determination and change is achieved through the intertribal council work, whose goal it is to create a common identity and work to both assimilate into the dominant culture, but also keep their cultures and identities separate to some extent. They must work to determine whether tribes should move to cities or remain on reservations, or whether people should operate casinos or engage in more traditional activities. Native Americans are a sovereign nation whose government is guaranteed by treaties with our federal government. A major source of income for Native Americans are the casinos, which collectively, across the U.S., nets more than the Las Vegas casinos. They net about $27 billion a year. California's United Auburn Tribe has 200 members, but the casino nets $30,000 a month for each member. This creates tensions among the different tribes, and those with established casinos work to keep other tribes from opening new casinos. We know that our demographics are changing. The expectation is that by 2042, the collective minority population will become the numerical majority. That means that whites will no longer be 50% or more of the population. Social change issues range from the current debate about immigration. Should we have tough laws to deport immigrants that don't have appropriate documentation? Or should we accept the fact that this is a big part of our workforce and make it easier to get documentation or work if the person doesn't have the right documents? Should affirmative action continue to be a part of our work and educational policies to help those groups that have historically experienced disadvantages to access more resources and opportunities? And should our society increase efforts at pluralism and multiculturalism, or should we expect and implement policies that reinforce assimilation? Policies in the near future need to take into account the fact that our demographics are shifting and that we already have a highly racially and ethnically diverse society. Our policies and attitudes will shape our nation in the years to come. So that concludes our chapter on race and ethnicity. We discussed the concept of race and the fact that it's a social construct and more of a myth than a reality. We talked about the concepts of prejudice and discrimination, and we learned about institutional discrimination. We also talked about concepts like population shifts and the ideas of assimilation and multiculturalism. Our next chapter will consider gender and age.